I don't actually have an official top 10 or even top 5 game list. It's something I've tried to do a few times, but I can never truly settle on. Still, if you asked me to list off my favourite games, I'd give you a selection of titles that has not changed or been added to for a very long time. Most of these games were not just landmarks of their genre and generation, but they also held a significant personal meaning to me at the time I was playing them. For example, while I consider Final Fantasy IX to be my favourite Final Fantasy, I can't overlook that Final Fantasy VII was my first ever big RPG, and that I played it at one of the most transformative periods in my life. I was barely out of high school at the time, and even then I was making decisions that would lead me to where I am now. So it's 7, not 9 that gets a spot in the all-times favourite list. Likewise, there are many Sega Mega Drive retro classics such as Sonic the Hedgehog that not only hold up well today, I mean, there's a reason the best Sonic game for the last 20 or so years was a fan project that blew up, but also cartoons and comics gave those characters far more depth than simply what was in the game. This sealed those characters in my mind as truly beloved, and I even enjoy the movies, despite being fairly cliched Hollywood plots featuring Sonic the Hedgehog characters. I certainly don't hate modern games. I really enjoy a big old graphical extravaganza when it's well done. Case in point, I absolutely loved the remake of Dead Space. But I think we're all aware, now more than ever, of the greed that's infested all modern AAA publishers and how it's damaged artistic integrity and destroyed the spirits of all but the hardiest developers at this point. One studio that seems to have avoided all that though is Fromsoftware. Based here in Japan, Hidetaka Miyazaki's studio has been doing very well with its popular Dark Souls series for quite a long time. These games are all about incredible art direction, narratives concealed within the small details, and punishing combat. The first 2 points had me intrigued, the third one, not so much. But it was the discovery that resting at a bonfire respawns all enemies that ultimately made me write them off as not my thing. I love a challenge, but I don't need to invite more frustration into my life. Still, in 2021 with Elden Ring on the horizon looking very tasty, I had to know if this really was or wasn't for me. The short version of what came next is that I used donation points from Nexus Mods to get a free Dark Souls 3 key. I made a conscious choice to only play in about 30-minute blocks, and to quit the moment I got too stressed and do something else. It took a while, but I eventually started to figure out what the fuss was about, and I, overall, had a good time. I even did some fan art. Now, I was using every resource I could to soften the blow, as it were, so I watched a lot of guides on bonfire locations and boss strats. Somewhere along the way, videos of Sekiro popped into my feed, and wow. Had someone smashed Dark Souls and Metal Gear Rising together? It certainly seemed that way. I wound up buying and installing Sekiro at full price before I even finished Dark Souls 3, but even with my expectations very high, I had no idea at the time that I was about to add a new game to my all-time favorites list. So, let's see if we can figure out how that happened. This is Sekiro. Shadows Die Twice. So, a little housekeeping first. Fromsoftware games are notoriously challenging. They're not difficult exactly. The difficulty is actually a very clever trick they play on you. In general, you know exactly what you need to do to progress. Bosses, for example, only cycle through a very limited number of animations, and only shake things up a little between phases. So it's pretty easy to figure out how to defeat them. But with their punishing damage output, actually doing that is something that takes practice. You may also lock yourself into a playstyle if you're not careful. It can be easy to think you have to be a guy with a sword who takes everything on close up, but you are actually overflowing with items, tricks, and options to make your life easier, up to and including calling your friends in for help. Either way, you are supposed to die a lot before you get the point. So I've been on the fence about what kind of footage to share with you all. On one hand, a recording of a new playthrough after a long break would show something closer to a first-time experience, with enemies dogpiling the player and bosses doling out absurd levels of damage while you just chip away at their health and hope to God you don't make a mistake. However, I figured it'd be a monumental pain to scrub through so much footage of me repeating the same sections over and over to find something I want to show you. A New Game Plus run though would be much smoother. as my character would be stronger, better equipped, and I'd be overall more skillful at the game and have all its dirty tricks well in mind. This, however, may give anyone who hasn't played the game an unrealistic expectation of what it's like. In the end, I settled on the option that would save my sanity the most. I recorded a New Game Plus run with my ninja tools almost completely maxed out, most of the skill trees full, and with something called Kuro's Charm equipped. This is a little boon you get for finishing the game that stops you taking chip damage from enemies when you block versus deflect. Fortunately though, I'm not a Sekiro no-hit master, and because I was more than a little overconfident in some areas and experimental in others, I wound up getting dogpiled and wrecked several times. Likewise, I had a few mental blocks on a few boss phases where I knew exactly what I needed to do, but for some reason just couldn't get with it. So you can see the ridiculous amounts of damage these guys do too. Just be aware though that when you see me stealth killing a group of enemies in quick succession without being seen, I had to go through some pain to get that order down. Likewise, some early mini-bosses like this Ashina 7 Spears guy are actually super challenging because of the range of their weapons, the strange rhythm of their attacks, and the massive posture damage they dole out when they connect. Still, I'm pretty proud of some of my boss finishes. Standing nonchalantly while Ishin the Sword Saint lines me up for an Ashina cross feels totally badass. Thank this guy for the training. More on that later. I live in Japan, and I speak passable Japanese. I'm actually a little out of practice since I work and socialise with mostly English-speaking people these days, so I only do a little small talk with coffee shop staff or people riding the elevator with me. You'd be surprised how often that second one comes up. So here's a little kanji class for you. Sekiro is a contraction of Sekiwan no Okami. It's a nickname that the Tengu of Ashina gives to our hero. Yep, it's a pun. You could say our Tengu is a pundit of Japanese wordplay. Huh? Seki is a counter for ships. And pairs. Kanji have different pronunciations depending on their relationship to other kanji. In the case of Ro, it's Okami, which means wolf. And yes, this game's title is yet more wordplay, as Okami is wolf and Okami-sama is the word for a Shinto god. So one is another pronunciation of ude, which means arm. So let's put it all together. Sekiwan no Okami means the one-armed wolf. And that right there is a great title for a Jason Statham straight-to-streaming movie. If you're thinking, oh boy, what a backwards writing system, well, kind of yes, kind of no. It's harder to wrap your head around than a phonetic or syllabic alphabet. But once you've done the groundwork, it communicates meaning much faster. The meaning here is that our boy Okami loses his left arm during an early game boss fight, and gets it replaced with a prosthetic that's not only capable of doing everything his old arm could do, but also has space for all kinds of tools and weapons to be hidden within. But let's rewind. While Sekiro, much like any Fromsoft game, is very subtle in how it reveals its story, even straight up hiding important information behind secret endings that require very specific and somewhat obtuse actions to be fulfilled, they always do a good job of setting the scene. We open on a pitched battle raging beneath the blood-red autumn leaves in the land of Ashina, somewhere in Japan. It is close to the end of the Sengoku Era, almost a century of civil war fought all across Japan, and judging by the look on this soldier's face, bloodshed is something he's seen far too much of. I sympathize. These days I can barely hold a grudge past my next cup of coffee, so this much murder would utterly baffle me too. Led by the master swordsman Ishin Ashina and his 7 samurai-esque group of misfits, the people have rebelled against their lord, and after an intense campaign, the kings on the board have finally clashed. Ishin finally strikes down his foe and declares victory for his side, and yet, even as the sun sets, we see the terrible toll paid for this victory, and the carrion move in to feast. We now see a lone boy, an orphan, lost and traumatized as he moves through the carnage in hope of a scrap to fill his starving belly. As he does, a razor-sharp blade crosses his face and draws blood. The boy now stands before the master of murder, the great shinobi, Owl. Impressed by the boy's tenacity though, and perhaps feeling a hint of compassion for one so young, he takes him under his wing and calls him his starving wolf. Thus, our hero takes the name Okami and begins his training as a shinobi. The second part sees our young boy now transformed into a handsome young man, kneeling at an open doorway while his father stalks around him, making damn sure that he knows whoever is on the other side is more important than his own life, and he is now oath-bound to defend them until their own death. And while our shinobi agrees to this pact, well, things don't go all that smoothly, which is great because we wouldn't have much of a game if they did. So, some unknown time after this, we find Okami slumped at the bottom of a well, seemingly broken and having completely given up on life. The narrator tells us that he has lost the man he once called father and the boy he was sworn to protect. All that is about to change though, when a mysterious figure approaches the well and tells him it's time to wake up and that his charge needs him. And just like that, a light rekindles in our boy's eyes, and our game begins. To even try to talk about the story of any Fromsoft Souls game is something of a challenge. This is because we are basically dropped into the world as it is, and it's assumed that we don't need bringing up to speed on things by a helpful NPC. Likewise, in Sekiro especially, the story is told out of sequence, and some of the information we get is somewhat unreliable. Even with a full analysis, there are still just enough holes in the available information to allow for some meaningful discussion on where certain things come from and what certain things symbolize, and there's a lot of symbolism in this game. But like with games like Silent Hill 2 and Signalis, there isn't one definitive true version of this story that we can cling to. Also, just a heads up, it's hard to say exactly what is or isn't a spoiler in these games. There's only a couple of big twists that I'll put up warnings for when they come, but everything else I'd consider fair game for a review. Sekiro is set in the fictional Japanese province of Ashina. It is a land of sacred water. The waters of Ashina tumble down from high in the mountains and enrich the land, bringing forth bountiful crops and great sake. It is no wonder then that such a vibrant and fertile land became the target of powerful warlords who use their might to take what they want. But more so, Ashina called to the divine dragon from its home in the west. Dragons in Eastern mythology have a strong connection with water and rivers, and are often depicted as such in old paintings. You've only to look at Haku in Spirited Away as a modern example. When the dragon settled, so the bountiful waters of Ashina took on an even more potent property, granting great resistance and power to those who drank it. They became known as the rejuvenating waters, and while they can bless those who consume them with great power, deep within, there is something corrupt about them. The nature of this corruption seems to be connected to the divine dragon itself, perhaps because it has travelled so far from its home, or perhaps simply because the gifts it can impart were not meant for mortals. Either way, the divine dragon's presence in Ashina has been as much a source of tragedy and strife as it has anything else, and it is indeed the main source of all the conflict in our game. Before we really drill down into the heart of that conflict though, let's take a step back and just admire the scenery for a moment. Whether or not you vibe with FromSoft's brutal combat or indirect storytelling, you cannot argue that their art direction is second to none. And while the fallen gothic utopias of the Souls universe are incredible to behold, Sekiro's world is Miyazaki's magnum opus. Well, at least it was until Elden Ring, but we'll talk about that another time. I suppose it helps that so much inspiration is just sitting on their doorstep, and it's something they've been exposed to their entire lives. Not far north of Tokyo is Tochigi Prefecture, and Nikko. The memorial of Tokugawa Ieyasu is one of the more famous tourist spots in this country, and with good cause. The many temples and shrines there are absolutely beautiful. Likewise, it's easy to see inspirations of the famous Kiyomizu Temple in Kyoto, in the elaborate mountain Senpu Temple, and within the sprawling castle of Ashina itself can be found flavours of Himeji and Osaka Castle. While FromSoft is certainly not short on money, the fact these are all places you can get to from Tokyo on a bus ride no doubt helped a lot when their artists were gathering reference material for the game. Ashina's mountains are also heavily inspired by old Japanese artworks, as are their character and enemy designs. I find it rather amusing that ancient Greek, Romans, and Renaissance artists all do their damnedest to flatter their subjects, but characters in old Japanese pictures are far from flattering. While Japan is a land of seemingly endless rolling mountains, they certainly aren't as big or as sheer as the ones depicted in the game. Rather, these seem to be realistic renderings of how mountains were drawn by old artists. It's a really beautiful interpretation of the work. It's a space filled with easily recognizable details such as the wooden shrines and pagodas, but it's also completely impossible. So let's start at the very top at the Fountainhead Palace. Impossibly high above the world, the method by which we reach this place is quite the spectacle in and of itself. This place seems almost like a paradise with its eternally blooming sakura trees and deep wells of water that literally flow from the shrine of the divine dragon. There are torii gates and other signs of religious importance here. These rocks, for example, are tied in the same way as the wedded rocks in Mia. These are not far from Ise Shrine, which is one of the most important locations in the Shinto religion. This seems on the surface like a spiritual and peaceful place, and the music here is at its most serene. Traveling down through the mountains we find Ashina, a snow-covered land, dominated by a sprawling castle, and we might notice an abundance of oversized animals and even people in this area. This is the result of the power within Ashina's waters. While the fish in general seem large all around here, it's within the depths of the Fountainhead Pool where the power of the rejuvenating waters are at their most potent that we find the Great Carp, a creature so glutted on this power that it has become a mini kaiju at this point. Meanwhile, descending into the valley beneath Ashina Castle takes us into the terrifying domain of the Great Serpent, a creature that will torment us on more than one occasion throughout the game, though we certainly have our chance at revenge moments. Damn! There are in fact two of these, though one remains ensconced in a cavern much deeper within the valley. In the depths of Ashina, where the waters pool and become stagnated, we find the eternally darkened Maibu village, and it really is amazing just how unique all these environments feel, and how well integrated they are with Okami's movements. Approaching Ashina Castle is very much an ascent, and we bring our various ninja tools to bear to launch ourselves higher and higher up the various structures, while descending through the valleys sees us plummeting great distances, only to latch onto something at the very last second. It's a hell of a movement power fantasy, and a great example of the perfect integration of mechanics and level design. I think my personal favorite location though is the Senpo Temple at Mount Kongo. Located lower in the valley than Ashina Castle, the snow has yet to touch this land, and the autumn leaves are now on full display. Ask any Japanese person what their favorite season is, and they'll tell you it's either spring or autumn. Summer is hot and humid, while winter has a deep, biting chill. Spring and autumn bring not only comfortable weather, but they also bring out the best in Japan's countryside, with colors being rich and vibrant, and Senpo Temple reminds me of everything I love about living here. All this eye candy is underscored by spectacular music that was composed primarily by Yuka Kitamura. Born in Hokkaido, Yuka joined Fromsoft in 2011 and composed music for Dark Souls, Bloodborne, Sekiro, and Elden Ring. There are a ton of themes and moods in the score that both capture the beautiful world in which we found ourselves, the heightened tensions of enemies becoming aware of us, and the raging boss battle music. It all fits so seamlessly together to create a really immersive and artistic experience. So certainly Ashina is a beautiful place, at least on the surface, but we've only to swim a little deeper into the waters, delve into a few of its caves, or simply meet a few important people to discover that something deep in the core of Ashina has started to rot, and it would seem our divine dragon is the true cause of it all. Dragon Rot seems like a fitting title for this part of the video because it's not only the name of an actual debuff we get in the game, but it's also symbolic of the larger corruption that's at play here. While human nature is certainly part of this, it can't be denied that the power of the divine dragon is what's causing most of the problems in this game. Okami is oathbound to protect a young boy named Kuro, who is also known as the Divine Heir. The last descendant of an ancient clan, Kuro's blood contains the power of the divine dragon and the gift of immortality. Prior to the start of the game, Kuro actually saved Okami from the verge of death by imparting his gift to him. In the heated conflict of the game's events, this power becomes fully awakened and allows our hero to resurrect a certain number of times, though this, as we'll soon discover, comes with a price. The enemies in this game covet this power and seek to exploit Kuro for their own ends, while Kuro himself would like nothing more than to be free of it. We later discover that the rejuvenating waters also offer their own temptations, as they too supposedly grant some semblance of eternal life, though it's much closer to unlife if I'm being honest, and both these powers have driven those around them to some pretty drastic actions. Things in Japan are changing, and the internal ministry that is working to unite the country now has its sights set on Ashina. Isshin, the once mighty sword saint, has grown old and sickly, and as he weakens, so hungry eyes once again rest upon the land. Isshin's grandson, Genichiro, while a formidable swordsman himself, wants to use the Divine Heir's power to stand against the forces of the internal ministry and keep Ashina as an independent state. His intentions, while quite noble, are somewhat misguided, and they've led him to take extreme actions in kidnapping Kuro and trying to force him to hand over his power. A recurring theme we'll see here is that Genichiro has told himself that this is for the greater good, and that it's the right thing to do, and he clearly hasn't thought through the consequences of his actions very well at all. The monks of the Senpu Temple have likewise been seduced by the lure of eternal life, and seemingly abandoned the teachings of the Buddha to drink from the rejuvenating waters and claim their powers as their own. More likely though, far from abandoning their ways, they've simply perverted the words of the Buddha to justify their actions, and, just like Genichiro, concocted some kind of personal narrative about why it's in everyone's best interest that they help themselves to this power. This has led to them performing experiments on kidnapped children to create their own immortal being, but more so, those who have drank deeply of the sacred waters have become infested. The infested are truly disgusting creatures that can be seen vomiting up cockroaches or... honestly, I don't want to know which orifice these centipedes are coming out of. These creatures seemingly exist within the ground nourished by the sacred waters and enter into those who drink deeply of them, be they human or, as we see in the case of the guardian ape, beast. They operate more like parasites, it seems, taking over their hosts. The corrupted monk, for example, is also infested, and uses her influence to convince the people of Maibu village to also drink the sacred waters, and the result of that is quite disturbing. The majority of the infested monks in the Senpu Temple remain completely motionless in their meditation position, only reacting to perceived danger when it's close, and the one infested we are actually able to communicate with would much rather be dead. Early in the game, Okami is overpowered by Genichiro. This goes a little differently in a New Game Plus when you've already fought him multiple times and are more than equipped to defeat him in single combat, but the result is the same. Genichiro severs Okami's left arm and leaves him to bleed out and die. However, Okami not only survives thanks to the dragon's power, but he is brought to a long-forgotten temple where my favourite character, a strange old sculptor with one arm, bestows upon him the shinobi prosthetic. This is a wondrous mechanical and probably magical appendage that is not only as functional as a regular arm, but can also be loaded with powerful ninja tools to make our lives a lot easier. I may do a full deep dive video on the sculptor one day. There are several out there already, but for now, I'll just say, if you know, you know.
あんた、考えたことがあるかい？そういう連鎖がどこに積もっていくのかを。ないだろう。ないだろうね。だからこそ、あんたもあやつも哀れなことだよ。
As wondrous and convenient as Okami's resurrection power is, it doesn't take long before we discover that it too comes with a terrible price. One does not simply deny death his due, and soon people start to become sick. This is because Okami's blood no longer has the power to revive him, and so he must take it from those around him. The weakness this inflicts is called dragon rot, and it's another example of how this power, whatever its source, is corrupted and not meant for mortal beings. It also reminds me somewhat of how immortality works in the Night Angel books, though these go a little harder. So this seems like a good place to throw up spoiler warnings. Again, it's kinda hard to know exactly what is or isn't a spoiler in these games, but I'll be addressing some late game narrative points from here on out, so just be aware of that. Okay, let's talk about why immortality sucks. Every year from late March to early April here in Japan, we are treated to one of nature's most spectacular flexes. The cherry blossom season is easily one of my favourite times of the year, and I make a point to see them in the most beautiful places that I can find. Sakura hunting is an absolute delight, and while it's always sad when, all too quickly, the season passes and I have to wait another year for a chance to see it again, I am just as excited for the coming spring, even the summer for all its devastating heat and humidity, the red leaves of autumn, and the cold kiss and long nights of winter. As much as I adore the Sakura, I love them all the more for being finite. It would certainly be nice if it stretched out for a month or two, but at some point it would become something that I can do anytime. Something I can put off until tomorrow if I'm not feeling it today. Something I'd take for granted. I often watch the sunset over the mountains from my veranda, and every time I do, it's magnificent. But I also have plenty of nights where I think, I can do it tomorrow. This is an absurd statement because if you've ever lost someone, be they family, a friend, a lover, or even a pet, then you know that tomorrow, absolutely, is not promised. Life is beautiful because it's finite. The seasons are beautiful because they change, and whatever sadness you meet at the closing of one is replaced with joy at welcoming the next. All things come and go in their time, as will we. You cannot hold on to anything. If you cling to your past, then you miss out on this very moment and all the wonder that can be found therein. You can fear and rage against the future, but it will come regardless of what you think, and anything you grasp tightly, you will choke. The Souls games have always presented this narrative of life in phases or cycles, moving from one to the other. While Gwyn's linking of the first flame is looked upon as a great and noble sacrifice, dig deep enough and it's revealed as an abomination. Linking the flame does not save the world, it's a coping mechanism, a way in which the Age of Fire can tread water for just a little longer. The flame will die, and people will wither and hollow, and all that was once great and majestic will rot and decay. With each cycle, the light grows a little dimmer, and the suffering for this defiance grows longer. This is the truth of grasping, for as painful as it can be to let something go, it is in keeping with the laws of the universe. Everything changes. All seasons have their time, and all must change. Immortality is a curse, a stagnation, a prison of stone, an existence in which all will become grey and empty and nothing will excite or invigorate you. However many years or centuries it will take, eternity will become hell. Or maybe even worse, because at least in hell, you can feel something. Fromsoft and Miyazaki didn't back off from this theme in Sekiro. In fact, they doubled or maybe even tripled down on it. The Souls games don't exactly judge you for your choice of ending. You are free to interpret much of what you see for yourself. But Sekiro's narrative goes a little harder than that. All of the enemies in Sekiro are chasing the power of the divine dragon. They want to exploit Kuro for their own ends. Meanwhile, the few people who have immortality, including Kuro himself, want to give it up. A pivotal moment in the game sees Okami reunited with his father Owl. During a flashback scene where a group of bandits attacked and burned the Hirata estate, where Okami and Kuro lived for a while, we find Owl defeated and dying, and this is presumably the last they see of each other up until this point. Leading a group of ninjas working for the Internal Ministry, Owl has come to collect Kuro and deliver him to whatever they consider safety. The iron code of the shinobi that Owl basically brainwashed his son with states that his word is absolute, even beyond that of his own word to protect his charge. Here, you can agree to help Owl procure Kuro and fight through to the bad ending, or turn on your father. This is actually the biggest moment of character development for our hero, the point at which he starts making his own rules and living his own life. The decision to protect Kuro and aid him in his quest for immortal severance is looked upon as heroic, while those who try to take the power are vilified and show corruption far beyond simple greed. The infested creatures or the people of Maibu village are more like horrific undead monsters or shades than actual people, and the nobles of the Fountainhead Palace are almost like vampires in the way they desire to suck youth and vigor out of others. On the other hand, Ishin Ashina is now old and sick. He is dying. If anyone could benefit from the Divine Dragon's power, it's him. And with him young and strong, Ashina might stand a chance. Certainly he is more respected and feared than his grandson. But he refuses. He has no desire to either be immortal or for Kuro to be exploited, and is in part responsible for Okami and Kuro's reunion. So I'd say the symbolism here is far from subtle. Perhaps he sees the bigger picture here. Perhaps he understands that it's better for Ashina to become part of the greater united Japan. Certainly, it seems better than fighting an eternal war for their independence. There's a lot of Buddhist ideology at work here. Most of you probably know the word reincarnation, though you may have a somewhat westernized interpretation of the idea. Buddhism doesn't strictly believe in a soul in the way Western religion does. There is no center of consciousness that continues on after death. Indeed, most of their disciplines, meditation especially, are centered on liberation from the idea of a central self, as this is looked upon as the root of all suffering. So, reincarnation isn't your ghost getting a new body and keeping all your old memories in storage somewhere. The cyclic nature of life is just the way of the universe. The seed becomes the tree, that becomes the fruit, that becomes the soil, that nurtures the seed, and so on, round and round. But more so, since the seed needs the soil to become the tree, the soil and the tree are two parts of one thing, just like backs and fronts, ups and downs, and light and dark. They imply each other. They need each other. They are not fundamentally opposed, and thus, neither are life and death. Just like waves in the ocean, we rise and fall only to rise again. The shape may vary, but it is always the same ocean. To anyone who sees the world this way, immortality would be an abomination, an unimaginable torment from which there is no escape. And I'd put forward they'd think the same of eternal life in paradise. After all, if it was all perfect all the time, how would you know? At what point would you start to take even this for granted? Shadow is how we notice light and how we create form. Take a drawing class. You'll figure it out quickly enough. So I think that's as deep as we need to dive into Sekiro's story and themes for now. While I absolutely love talking about Zen philosophy, it's probably about time we address the gameplay. And, oh god, does this game fuck. It's hard to talk about this kind of game and not bring up its challenge. With Fromsoft, challenge is generally a matter of even regular enemies being very aggressive and having very high damage output, while bosses can usually two-shot or in some cases one-shot you. Likewise, healing is strictly controlled through a health drink system that has limited uses overall and requires an unskippable animation to be played in order to work. During this animation, you will be vulnerable and enemies are aware of this. This can be something of a recipe for frustration if I'm being completely honest, and I still don't know if I think game developers should be cultivating this in their players. That doesn't mean it doesn't work, and your second time through when you've got it all down will be all the more satisfying for having worked so hard to get it, but my feelings on this are mixed. Even so, I can't deny that all the different elements of the game come together perfectly, and it's the experience as a whole that elevated this beyond simply being a game I enjoyed to one of my all-time favourites. So in the end, I have to bow to this. Sekiro is a better game for being challenging. I recall the first time I defeated Gyobu. I immediately took to Salt Factory's Discord and, well, here's the message I wrote. So Sekiro has high damage enemies who can easily dogpile and wreck you if you don't show them due respect, and challenging boss fights that demand you play to a high standard or you aren't getting past them. So, how do we take them down? We do it like a ninja. Okami has two big advantages over his many enemies. The first is stealth, and the second is hypermobility. The Shinobi Prosthetic's most useful tool is a high-powered grappling hook, and the power fantasy of this thing alone is worth the price of entry. If Sekiro had an explorer mode that removed all the enemies and just let you fling yourself around the map, you could still have a damn good time. This ability is also just as useful for getting you out of or into trouble, as it connects seamlessly with the game's stealth system. Sekiro's stealth is basic, but don't think that's a criticism. It's about as complex as it needs to be, with only a couple of areas that I consider to be broken or unfair. What I mean by basic is guards aren't running elaborate patrol routes or supporting each other in intelligent ways. Soldiers simply stand in their designated places, very often just staring into space, basically waiting for you to come along and kill them. Some enemies, like these monks at the Senpo Temple, seem to be in some kind of deep meditative state, as they stare out in various directions to block you from making a stealthy approach and never move. So, your job is to figure out the blind spots in their vigil and remove the enemies one at a time until you can either get past them or they're all dead. This is finely balanced. Soldiers only patrol when doing so adds to the challenge in a meaningful way, and even then they move in easy to learn patterns. Stealth is a matter of being out of sight, either creeping through the tall grass or slipping beneath buildings. Sound rarely plays into it, especially after you've bought a few upgrades. You can smash ceramic shards to get attention if needed, but they're not that useful in my experience. Your objective in these sections, assuming you aren't looking to slip away without a fight, is to thin out enemy numbers by sneaking behind or above them and landing a death blow. Death blows are one of Sekiro's unique features. You can one-hit kill any regular enemy and steal at least one life from a boss enemy, providing you can sneak up on them or gain an advantageous position. These are incredibly stylish, and that bell sound just drives dopamine into your system and makes you want to keep going. When you finally got an area figured out, it's really satisfying to rapid-fire stealth kill an entire group of enemies without being seen. The tough part is figuring it out though. There are a lot of shitty enemy placements, and these guys are just as eager to leap out and surprise you as you are them. The dogs in this game also have a special place on my list of things that I murder with the utmost prejudice. Now, I'm a dog person. Even with my allergies, I'm gonna play with a dog until I can barely keep my eyes open before bowing out. But these things can be so damn annoying if you aren't aware of them. Unfortunately, even if you are able to get a really good position to scout out an area, there are just going to be some guys you won't be able to spot, and you'll have to learn about their existence the hard way. The reason for all the sneaking around is that engaging more than one enemy in combat at a time is incredibly difficult, especially if they have different kinds of weapons, and if there's 3 or more, you're going to need to peace out quickly, or you'll be eating dirt even quicker. That's not to say that Okami is some kind of glass cannon, but he's certainly got some of that Souls protagonist fragility, and you're going to die a lot at the start. At least until you learn a few things about swordplay. Sekiro has quite possibly the best swordplay in any game I've played. In fact, stop here. If you know a game that has swordplay as good as, if not better than this, let me know in the comments. I'd love to play it. It's fast, brutal, easy to learn, difficult to master, and when everything is flowing perfectly, you feel like an absolute badass. Fromsoft games don't care for knuckle-busting combinations like, say, Devil May Cry, Sifu, or Sleeping Dogs. There's enough challenge going on without needing to recite elaborate button presses from muscle memory. The right shoulder button is attack, and the left is block. Unlike classic Souls games, Sekiro doesn't have a stamina meter to arbitrarily limit your attack output, but it does have blocking and posture, and this might be one of the best ideas I've ever seen added to an action game. While there are a few unskilled conscripts in the Ashina army, you'll mostly be squaring up to highly trained samurai who know their business very well. So as much as you swing your blade, you're probably just getting sore arms and a dull edge as they block you. While you can't very often get at their vitality, you can wear down their posture with constant impact. Break that and they will be wide open for a death blow. While attacking will wear down posture, the real way to quick victory is through perfectly timed deflects. Basically, rather than holding block, you tap it during a window in the attack animation and perform a deflect. This will not only cancel all damage to you, but also do massive damage to the enemy's posture. This is the part of the game that had me thinking, oh, you don't want Dark Souls Arkham. You want Metal Gear Rising Arkham. Sure, I can give you that. So perfect defense is just as, if not more important than good offense. Well, at least until you know your enemies and your tools. As you get more comfortable with the game and the range of attack options at your disposal, you'll be able to play much more aggressively, but perfect deflections are an absolutely essential part of Sekiro's gameplay. Pressing the left and right shoulder buttons together will do a special attack, and which attack that is, you'll have to select ahead of time. There's a big variety of these, but you'll probably just have a couple of go-to moves that you'll switch out depending on the enemy type. There's a dodge button and a jump button, and you'll use these respectively to escape telegraphed perilous attacks that cannot be blocked in the regular way. While playing the game, you'll receive a selection of esoteric scrolls to spend your XP on. XP is gained from killing enemies and goes up in blocks. Every full block is safe from death penalties, but you'll lose 50% of the XP in any incomplete block, along with half your money when you die. The first scroll you'll receive is the Shinobi esoteric text that gives you access to the Shinobi arts, and no matter what else you do, you want to buy the Mikiri counter as soon as possible. These kanji are see and cut. When placed together, they mean sale or bargain, and abandonment. This one move is critical to rounding out Okami's moveset though. There are various kinds of perilous attack. Sweeping attacks need to be jumped, grab attacks avoided, and thrusting attacks need to be seen and cut. You'll use this a lot on enemies with spears, but some sword enemies also have thrusting attacks. A well-timed press of the dodge button will see Okami stamp down on the offending blade, doing massive damage to the enemy posture and leaving them wide open for a counter. You can get so good at these that it honestly feels like enemies are doing you a favor when they try to stab you. There's plenty of useful passive skills too that increase your damage, make health drinks more potent, or make you more difficult to detect when sneaking, but I can't recommend the Ashina art skill tree enough. You'll receive this from the eccentric Tengu character early in the game, and I actually poo-pooed it on my first playthrough until the very end.
Well then, damn it all, what more evidence do you need? The poo-pooing alone is a court-martial offence.
The combat arts and the ability to leech health on death blows though are priceless, and there's a special bonus scroll for anyone who fills it out. Next we have prosthetic tools. These are found at various places around the map, and once you've got the components, you have to return to the sculptor so he can install the new tool. There's also an entire suite of upgrades for these that are bought using money and various crafting components found around the map. The rarest of these being in very limited supply and usually only popping up towards the end of the game. I'd say Sekiro does a pretty good job of teaching you about these, mainly through some early boss encounters. Both this Chained Ogre mini-boss and Gyobu have samurais standing around who just happen to be talking about the convenient weaknesses these enemies have to fire, or loud noises. It's not a lot to go on, but when you stumble across the flame vent or firecrackers, the pieces of the puzzle might just click into place. You are restricted in the use of these though, as they are all powered by spirit emblems. You can find these all over the world and many enemies drop them, but you'll eventually have to recharge them by visiting a sculptor's idol. Idols are this game's bonfires. Take a rest that will reset your health and healing items, do various upgrade things, and of course, resting here causes all enemies to respawn. Try not to think of this as frustrating though. Remember, no one said you had to kill everyone between where you are and where you want to go. And the infinite supply of enemies makes experience and cash a fairly cheap commodity, and not something you should ever be upset about losing when you die. There's also a good helping of consumables to gain various temporary buffs to your attack power, posture, and stealth. There's little tricks like ash bombs that have their uses on grunt level enemies, and divine confetti that can make dealing with undead enemies almost trivial. At the start of a new game though, these will be finite, so it's always better to know your enemy's attack patterns before burning through them. There's nothing worse than rushing into a fight with a powerful buff and losing by a fraction of an inch, only to have to retry the damn thing without that buff. Later in the game, you'll get the Dragon's Tallyboard that makes you a VIP customer with all the game's merchants, and you'll be able to stock up on these things to your heart's delight. Okami's final trick is his ability to resurrect. The first time he falls in battle, he hears the voice of the Divine Heir calling him back. Returning from the dead uses nodes of resurrection power, and these can be replenished by executing death blows on enemies. Since boss enemies have multiple lives of their own, this means you'll actually have a couple of chances per phase to figure them out, unless they corpse camp you and murder you again as soon as you're standing up. I mentioned before about Dragon Rot, how it makes other characters in the game sick. It's also a minor negative debuff. When dying, there is a percentage chance of gaining Unseen Aid. This boon negates any loss of XP and money that you get from dying, but if you have Dragon Rot, this chance drops very low. You can fix Dragon Rot after completing a small quest by bringing Dragon Blood droplets to a sculptor's idol. One thing I love about Sekiro's world design is you aren't exactly forced to put up with anything. At least not for quite a while. This is mainly because there are multiple areas to explore, and you can switch back and forth between them more or less at your leisure. In the opening hours we are exploring the Ashina outskirts, making an approach towards the castle to once again rescue Kuro. This takes the shape of several areas we have to traverse while taking on regular enemies and various mini-bosses. Actually, there's a lot of these. Soon though, we'll gain access to a bell that when chimed at a carving of the Buddha, will awaken a repressed memory within Okami and actually magically transport him back to a night some time ago at the Hirata estate. This was the place where he'd initially been watching over Kuro. It was attacked and burned by bandits, though this was actually a cover for an attempt to kidnap the Divine Heir. This is a whole massive standalone area with unique enemies to face and items to find. While it's a memory, anything you find here can be brought back. In this way, you are encouraged to not simply put up with the game's bullshit, but to get creative about it. This ogre, for example, is vulnerable to fire, so while you could simply learn its patterns the hard way, you're doing yourself a favour by taking a step back, exploring the Hirata estate, and finding the items needed to make the flame vent. Now, if you toss oil on the thing and set it alight, you can do vitality damage to it and open it up to some more attacks. The Hirata estate also has its own secrets to uncover, and if you jump through some very specific hoops, you can even find an alternative version of the memory that can grant you a different way to finish the game. As we reach Ashina Castle, we are met by this old lady on the bridge who is praying to the Senpo Temple at Mount Kongo. She gestures off into the distance as she mentions a special holy child that lives there. And while you're absolutely welcome to ignore the whole thing and go charging up the castle for your rematch with Genichiro, you can take a detour and go find all the things in here too. You'll gain a bunch of XP, an esoteric scroll, and if you do go there early, you'll receive an item normally found much later in the game from this monk here. This creates a much more pleasant experience overall. Rather than beating your head against a boss over and over, you can take a break and do something else for a while. You will eventually hit a wall where you have to deal with either Lady Butterfly at the Hirata estate or Gyobu at the castle gates. And of course at some point you have to get on with your battle with Genichiro, but look, we've all had it when you're stuck on a boss, you quit out for the night and then the next day you want to play, but you just don't have the mental energy to deal with this fuckboy. This is a good compromise. If nothing else, you're getting more training in the deflect system and maybe finding some prayer beads to buff you up for your next attempt. Boss fights are one of the important elements of any Fromsoft game, and as someone who's something of a stickler when it comes to boss fights, I'd say they do a pretty good job overall. The boss fights in any Souls games are where all the elements of the game's art, music and sound design come together as these spectacular titans roll up to make your life miserable. Likewise, they rarely rely on cheap one-shot mechanics. Rather, they simply require you to play the game you've already been playing to a higher standard than you have been up to this point. Now that I'm well acquainted with all of them, I can't really think of a Sekiro boss that I don't like. Well, maybe the monkeys. That's the one I'd consider to be a miss, but I can see what they were going for. Stealth more or less gets thrown out the window when it's time to throw down with a big bad, so having a big challenge that involves stalking and staying hidden was definitely a good idea, just not one that I feel they really nailed. There are a lot of mini-bosses in this game too. They actually form a big part of our progression. Sekiro isn't a true RPG, as it doesn't have an elaborate system of stats that you increase as you level. Increasing your health is a matter of finding 4 prayer beads and bringing them to a sculptor's idol. The main bosses all grant a memory that can be reflected upon to increase your attack power as well. This adds a little extra excitement to boss encounters and incentivizes you to work through even the mini bosses that you can just fly on past or are too far out of the way for you to ever actually have to worry about. They are in and of themselves great challenges and provide much needed variety to the regular routine of stealth kills and fencing. And the game world actually feels a little empty once you've cleared them out. Since these guys are mostly out in the open, it's often possible to get a stealth kill on them to rob them of one of their health points. But it also means you'll have to clear the battlefield before going in, because the last thing you want when you're concentrating on one of these guys is an ad to come charging in to make your life more difficult. Still, these extra people are not without their uses. Later in the game, you'll gain a technique called Puppeteer, and you can use it to turn any enemy you backstab into an ally. There's a couple of mini-bosses that seem primed for this strategy, providing you take a second to scan your environment before going in. These guys also serve as good practice for later enemies. Larger samurai who have big sweeping katana attacks are actually offering a little training for your next bout with Genichiro. Spear wielders will clue you in from what to expect from the likes of Gyobu, the corrupted monk, and even the final boss Ishin the Sword Saint in his second phase. This samurai here in fact just spams the Ashina cross that Ishin uses. And while you can make your life easier by hitting him with your poison tanto and just backing away while his vitality slowly ebbs away, do yourself a favour and get the practice in while you can. Sekiro was, apparently, even among Souls fans, considered to be too difficult back when it came out. I'm not actually sure how true that is. It could have been something like just a dozen or so guys complaining about it on Reddit, getting blown out of proportion by someone like Kotaku, because Souls fans strike me as a smart bunch overall. The pacing of the big battles is very different though. While the deflect window is far more generous here, enemies can attack in rapid flurries, and since they mostly aren't giant monstrosities who telegraph their attacks so someone in Okinawa can see them, there probably was a harder adjustment for the average Souls fan. If that was or is you, then I'll just say that I recently reinstalled Dark Souls 3 to get some capture for this video, and I was sorely missing my 2 lives, no stamina, and rapid deflects. We are not better or worse, we're just different. There are 2 basic kinds of bosses, vitality bosses and posture bosses. That is to say, bosses who need to be hit and damaged in order to be brought down, and ones that can be posture broke through a combination of deflects and counters. The Guardian Ape is actually both. While his attacks in the first phase can be deflected, he's so chaotic and hard to keep on top of that you're better off waiting for the lulls between his attacks and cutting him up before rushing away to safety. However, in his second phase, after he's been decapitated, you're much better off deflecting his attacks and breaking his posture, especially once you know this trick with the loaded spear. Boss posture can recover very quickly though, meaning you either have to play very aggressively or work in quick counters with your deflects to sap their vitality. As vitality goes down, so too does posture recovery slow down, making that all-important death blow more and more likely. This is one of the areas where the sound design really sells the scale of your challenge. Deflects have a loud and satisfying ring to them, but the basic impact sound of your sword hitting an enemy feels like chipping away at a massive tree. On the other hand, when you land one of those special attacks, their sound effects are powerful and satisfying. And let's not forget that death blow chime and the spray of blood that follows. Since animations can't be cancelled, You don't want to come at these guys spamming your attack button, or you'll very quickly find yourself on the receiving end of a devastating blow. Instead, you need to develop a steady rhythm that gives you time to see how the enemy is reacting. Genichiro is a great example here. Sure, he's only a regular human, but he's taller than Okami, and his bulky armor makes him a big target. His sword is also bigger than Okami's, but it's not the size that matters, if you know what I mean. So you can see there's some big wind up here that you can react to. Likewise, his patterns aren't that hard to figure out. He has a big spinning move before he launches into his flurry attack, which gives you time to either back away, bust out the loaded umbrella, or prep for a big deflection challenge. Let's look at an even later boss, the Mighty Owl. In fact, let's go with his even tougher hidden form. The man's a giant, and his sword is anything but subtle. So you've plenty of visual data on what's coming, but check this. That shove means he's about to throw gunpowder and strike through it. I could deflect the blade, but the powder will explode and I'll be left dazed and vulnerable. It's a technique I use myself. He taught it to me after all. So when this shove comes, I dodge away, then rush in after the explosion and get some free damage on him. As difficult as these guys seem, they are in the end just a collection of animations and fairly simple AI that tells them to perform certain actions under certain conditions. While having to repeat these fights many times over does sorta mean you're seeing under the hood of the game like this, I wouldn't say it completely destroys immersion. Oddly enough though, for me, the best boss in the game might be the least challenging. Okami's quest to help the Divine Heir to rid himself of the dragon's heritage takes him all the way to the Divine Realm to stand against the beast itself. This is one of the most beautiful set pieces in the game. The setting with this eternal Sakura tree, the music and this absolute titan of an enemy is just jaw-dropping. Mechanically there isn't much to it. We just need to grapple onto various points and stay ahead of its attacks, until we can catch a lightning bolt and hurl it at the dragon. There is also a brief section where we actually have to duel with this thing that I find awesome. But this whole section is just a work of art, and an incredible climax to this leg of the journey. In dissecting the different elements of Sekiro, I think we can see that one reason it's so special is that each element has been given a great deal of care and attention. The story is powerful and moving, dealing with themes of life, death, and mortality. The characters are layered and deep, but it's not all there on the surface. You have to get a few of them drunk to start telling you their life stories. Even our boy Okami isn't this eternally stoic pure warrior. There's a wonderful interaction between him and Kuro, where Kuro discovers he's been eating uncooked rice. Kuro agrees to make something sweet for Okami when he returns, and if you eat the sweet rice bowl in front of Kuro, the sheer sincerity in the way Okami says it's delicious is very touching.
そうであろう、そうであろう。
It's like he's lived his whole life viewing food as nothing but fuel for his body, and never once considered that it could actually be wonderful to eat. The World is another of Miyazaki's artistic masterpieces, and the movement and combat create a game that is both incredibly challenging but immensely satisfying to play. I should say here that I don't think that Sekiro is better than Dark Souls. It's clearly more of a segue than an improvement, a way of presenting that familiar formula in a different way. This is just the one that resonates with me more. In the end though, it's the whole that really elevates this to something truly special. Every element of this game works perfectly with every other element. You never feel like this is the stealth section or this is the fighting section. Everything blends so seamlessly to create one of the best ninja experiences I've ever got to grips with. It's all so captivating that I didn't feel like I was sitting at my computer replaying a boss for the 20th time. I was the one-armed wolf, and I was on an oath-bound mission to rescue the Divine Heir. Genichiro, Lady Butterfly, or the Great Ally weren't boss enemies running a limited animation set that I had to puzzle out. They were my sworn foes who were trying to exploit a boy for personal gain, and they stood between me and my ultimate goal. There was no hesitation when the Great Dragon revealed itself to me, only anticipation. This is what I'd been waiting for. This is what I'd fought so hard to reach, and now I would not be denied my prize no matter what. It's this total immersion in the experience that makes the best games or movies or books. Those moments when you are so completely lost to the world and entranced in the magic of everything around you. The replay value on this can't be understated either. Like many of my favourite games, the second run feels very different to the first, and while it doesn't have the mystery or surprises to hit you with anymore, it's a much bigger power fantasy. Likewise, Reflections of Strength and Gauntlets of Strength mean you can re-challenge bosses any way, where, time or how you want. There is just so much here that I could see myself coming back again and again every year to revisit this land, its enemies and allies, and who knows, maybe just stumble onto some obscure little secret that I'd never even known was there before. Well, Sekiro got me itching to keep up with challenging martial arts games, and there's one that I've had my eye on for a while now. In February of 2022, a French indie studio called Slowclap put out an arty beat 'em up called Sifu. Similar to Sekiro, it has a system of timed blocking that is used to break enemy structure and deliver rapid knockout blows, and follows the classic Fist of Fury story of a young man out to get revenge against a rival martial arts master for murdering his teacher. The player experience looks like it's casting you as a hero in a stylish, ultraviolet Hong Kong action movie, and I love Hong Kong action movies. And so with my New Game Plus run on Sekiro completed, it seemed like the stars had finally aligned and it was time to add this game to my cart. And oh my god guys, this game rocks. Well guys, we made it. I never thought, back when I started this channel, that I'd ever wind up talking about one of these games, but I am, if nothing else, open to new experiences. Thanks for coming, and thank you for staying till the end if you made it all the way here. I just want to say welcome and thank you to all the new subscribers I've received recently, and thank you for the phenomenal response to my Castlevania video. I've enjoyed reading every one of your comments, and to the few people who tried to trash me for my opinions, well, it says a lot more about you that you couldn't just click off a nobody YouTuber's opinion piece on a game and ignore it than it does about me. I'm not sure what the real pain you're carrying around is, but if my opinions on anything can really upset you that much, well, I'd say you need to do some real soul searching and maybe get professional help. Trust me, I've been there. Things will be shifting up or down a few gears after Sifu though, as I've gotten back into enjoying narrative adventure games. So I've got a few of those I'd like to talk about, and I've had a bit of a shopping spree on the GOG sale, so maybe you'll be seeing a couple of these on the channel before the end of the year. For now though, don't forget to do the things that push the video. I have a coffee account here if you'd like to buy one for me, and whatever else you do, stay fucking awesome guys.